Welcome to the Free Marketeers, the official podcast of the Free Market Foundation.
Good afternoon, dear listeners. This is this week's edition of the Free Marketeers podcast, and I am joined by Martin van Staden and Chris Hattingh. And so maybe we should just jump right into it. Earlier this week on Wednesday, we had Advocate Mark Oppenheimer speaking here at the FMF, and I believe the title of his talk was How to Stop EWC. So do you have a few comments on that, Martin?
Yeah, no, Mark did a great talk here at the FMF, basically outlining some myths about that are underlying the whole expropriation without compensation narrative. Basically this idea that one racial group as a collective whole stole from another, and like as if that's one single hive mind. And he made the point that there has been a lot of transaction between the races, at least since apartheid ended, and that there's definitely a lot more nuance to the whole situation. And of course, he made the point that those of us on the free market side of things keep making, basically that restitution is an imperative, especially if you have a system dedicated to property rights. Basically, if the property was taken during apartheid, then of course, if you can prove that, you should get the property back, or as the Constitution provides, you should be able to get financial compensation for it. And that is a matter of justice and redress, and it's fine. And he made the point that that is completely unrelated to this plan of expropriation without compensation, which that in itself will just produce the carnage we see in Venezuela and Zimbabwe. And then of course he went on to make some suggestions about how expropriation can be fought, and he divided that into three categories, basically in the press, and that is what the Free Market Foundation, the Institute of Race Relations, and all the clear-headed institutes in South Africa are doing. We are fighting this battle in the press, making sure that the arguments against expropriation without compensation are read and heard by ordinary South Africans. Then fighting it in the polls, basically fighting it politically. He made the very important point, I would say, that all the opposition parties that opposed EWC will need in this year's election is 4%. Collectively, they need 4% extra to avoid expropriation, because then the parties that do favor expropriation without compensation will no longer have 66.3%, i.e. a 2/3 majority, which is what they need to amend the Constitution. So vote, please, and vote against expropriation without compensation, so that we can get whichever of the opposition parties over that extra 4%. And then finally made the point, the courts. So expropriation without compensation can be fought in the court system. That's something that I have personally been working on over the last year or so, formulating potential arguments that can be made in the judiciary against expropriation, either before it is actually implemented or afterwards. And today, one of my arguments was published in the Attorney's Journal, the Rebus. It's their featured article, which I'm quite proud of, if you don't mind me saying so myself.
Hashtag humble brag.
Yeah, I'm very humble about it. But yeah, so it outlines the basic structure doctrine, which is one of several potential arguments that can be made in the courts against expropriation without compensation. And yeah, that's the gist of Mark's talk. So please, if you are interested in hearing it, and I must say I left out a lot of detail, it's a really valuable talk, please go to the Free Market Foundation's YouTube channel, the same one you are listening to this podcast on, and please listen to and watch the video that we recorded of Mark this past Wednesday.
And Chris, do you have anything to add on that? Or?
Yeah, I thought it was an excellent presentation overall. Mark made a lot of the legal stuff simpler for the layperson, which I think was really good. So as Martin said, if you have some time, please try and go and watch the presentation on our YouTube channel. But also, I think just two important points to highlight from his talk. He encouraged people, if you're opposed to EWC, please write letters, articles, whatever. You know, you don't have to do it for a certain publication or institution. Just write to your newspapers, send letters to the editor. Let's just get as many voices out there as possible. And then just on the voting part, because this to me personally has been sort of an issue that one wrestles with. How far do you sort of compromise your principles, if that's the way to think about it? But I think the context is that we are dealing with this threat, this existential threat to individual rights in South Africa. So there's a line you have to come to and decide, you know, either I'm just going to hold my nose and vote for one of the parties opposed, or I'm going to, you know, try and make plans to leave the country kind of thing. So I think it's reaching that sort of crisis point now. And it's unfortunate. You don't want a gun held to your head to make you force you to make a choice. But perhaps we're just there now where I think you need to vote for one of these parties.
Yeah.
No, I agree with both of you. Here at the FMF, we are non-partisan, but I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with telling people that just vote to stop EWC. We're not calling for changing the government or anything. We're just saying, let's stop this thing. Let's not say it's because it will destroy everything we hold dear, property rights, or the economy. So it's yeah. But moving on, there was an interesting article this week where President Cyril Ramaphosa basically said that business leaders should kick him in the butts, or kick him and his cabinet in the butts if they do anything to harm the economy, or rather anything that, or they are not implementing a particular policy that would add to economic growth. So I don't know what you have to say about that, Chris.
Well, we have to, I guess this touches exactly on what Mark was talking about, EWC. In the same article, I didn't read that the president said they're dropping EWC. So I guess we're all definitely going to kick him and the cabinet in the butt for that. When we're all standing in the bread lines together, we'll have ample opportunity to kick the politicians. But I don't really see how he expects accountability to play out, because we see these promises by parliamentarians and politicians before every election, you know, hold us accountable and stuff, and then stuff we vote for a different party or the same party, and the same stuff happens. So how exactly, I don't know, there was nothing concrete to me. This was just sort of another election ploy, which you know, not to attack the president directly, every politician does this. It's simply trying to garner votes kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, forgive me for being the complete cynic among you. A lot of people don't even want to talk to me because they know this is how I am. But the fact is, the government has said this before. I mean, the previous Deputy Minister of Finance, Mtheni Jonas, he said, when the government enacts policies that you do not agree with, ordinary South Africans, please tell us, and then we'll review them. So don't worry. That has never been the case in South Africa. Government decides on these policies, whatever they may be, and then the country can stand on its head and sing tunes to its heart's content. The government is going to say, okay, let's talk about it. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Thank you for making your presentation. And they would submit their policy virtually unaltered to cabinet. It will be approved, it will become a bill, it will become law. This government, and I believe probably no government in South Africa's history, has ever really taken this principle of public participation seriously. They keep saying, please, we need a partnership, engage with us, let's make better law, better policy. That is never the case. And I mean, it's great that President Ramaphosa is saying this. Maybe he's going to be the one to change it. I'm not going to hold my breath. But the fact is, South Africans, when they implement a new tax, for example, the carbon tax, I can guarantee that 90% of South Africans do not want to pay higher taxes, and they said, no, thank you, and we are going to get a carbon tax anyway. So this government engages in what can we call predetermined conclusions whenever it goes about policies. I mean, that's the one thing that has been highlighted about expropriation without compensation. The governing party decided we are going to have expropriation without compensation. They did this public participation process, and despite the fact that most written submissions said no, the Constitutional Review Committee said, let's go, let's do it. And Parliament, as a result, also said, let's do it. So they don't seem to care about public participation. So I wouldn't get too excited about the president saying this. But, I mean, that does not mean you should not engage. Engage, because that is, if you annoy government enough, it needs to do something. So please do engage.
Martin, I just want to ask you, because you've done some work on the socio-economic impact assessments, right? The SEAs. And am I right, every department has to do that when they propose sort of new legislation? You know, that's sort of a concrete way of telling whether whether any part of government is actually following the steps, right?
Yeah, there's a policy in the Department of Planning, National Planning or whatever it's called, that says any department, agency, whatever, if it intends to introduce a policy or regulation or legislation, it needs to conduct a socioeconomic impact assessment. it's been unclear to me whether they've actually been doing this.
Okay.
A lot of them have been doing it, but
Okay.
to me, almost invariably, every single Shia has been a sham. It's
Right.
basically
Yeah.
a report basically extolling the virtues of the policy, saying this is why we need it, and
Yeah.
here's academic research that backs us up. And if there's some opposition to it, they'll put a little footnote in and say, some have said that it may do this, but don't worry, it won't, because this is just
all the mounds of evidence
we
too.
no, we have all the great intentions.
Oh, right.
We do not intend for that to happen, so don't worry, it won't. So that's essentially how Shias have been working out.
Okay.
A complete sham as far as I'm concerned, but it's good that they're being forced to do them.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I mean, the Free Market Foundation is involved in trying to improve the process. So hopefully we can get some real substance there at some stage.
Okay.
So on this SIA story, so I was just gonna say that on this EWC there is one SIA that's been put forward by Agri SA, and it's basically completely against the EWC policy. It's really it's research that's done following the right methodology and everything. And it's so when the president says when we're doing something that affects economic growth negatively, then surely he would have listened to he would have followed the only SIA that's been put out there, because the government hasn't done any SIA on the EWC.
Yeah.
No one else has done it. It's only this single one. So it's just one of those things. And then on the NHI as well, I know that they actually all the analysis done on the possible impacts has almost universally been negative, and they are plowing ahead, including from the government's own research.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know. I don't know what the president was trying to say here, but it's on the face of it, it seems like it's just simple politics. It doesn't.
Yeah.
There's no substance behind it.
Well, by force of will, it's not going to affect the economy, because the president has said it won't affect the economy, investment, or food security. So why do you need a SIA? It's going to it's going to work by force of will.
If you have the word of a politician, you don't need to worry about the facts of reality. I don't think it'll bail us out.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but moving on to the people. So, one of the events that happened at the Free Market Foundation within the past month was that we had a media briefing by the Alexandra property rights property owners from Alexandra, who are still trying to fight for their property. I don't know, many decades after it was taken away from them during the apartheid era. And so maybe we can just talk about that in the context of what's happening now, and what happens once you give the government the power to take away your property, and how hard it is to get it back. Because we are in a democracy in 2019 now, and these people are still fighting to get back their property, which is registered in the deeds office under their names, but it has been taken away from them by government, and they can't get it back. And so what do you think about that, Martin, and just how EWC might play out?
Okay, so a little bit of context on the Alexandra situation. So the apartheid group areas laws did not automatically expropriate black-owned land. So essentially, if you were a black person who owned property in a so-called white area, that property was still yours until such a time as government came and took it from you and moved you. And in Alexandra's case, those people who lived in Alexandra, this is the township next to Sandton, they owned property there in full freehold title until the 1960s, I believe. And that is when government came and I think did not evict them, but basically said, we are expropriating your property rights. You can stay as tenants, it's fine, but you do not own this property anymore. And that position has persisted more or less up until today. And it's actually quite I want to use the word disgusting state of affairs, because what has happened there is that property owners have been joined by a lot of what is called tenants. Now, one plot, for example, would have one rightful property owner who can claim his property back that was expropriated under the restitution process and get his title back. In theory, he can do that. But now his property is being lived on by 10, 20 tenants. And now you come to this unfortunate situation where it's a question of politics.
Right.
Do we give this individual, this singular individual who has this claim to this property, his property back? and thereby lose the votes of the 30 people living on his property because he wants to evict them or he wants to start charging them rent? Or do we just act as if nothing is happening and we get those votes? Unfortunately, it seems that what has kept this process so delayed until now has been because they've decided on the latter. Alexandra has millions of people living in it, millions of votes. The moment they go through the restitution process and give these people their full freehold tenure title back, they're going to potentially lose a lot of votes. And this is not only one party. There are at least two parties involved here, the green and the blue team. They are both, I would say, equally culpable for what's going on here, and they're both just playing politics, don't care about the justice, the property rights involved here.
No.
And I mean, to link this to expropriation without compensation, the fact is that essentially these people's property were expropriated without compensation. They are now in democratic South Africa. They have at least the legal opportunity to get their property back and to have it secure in terms of the protections offered by the Constitution. The moment expropriation without compensation becomes part of the Constitution, that opportunity virtually vanishes. It doesn't matter that the property rights provision is still there. The fact that they can take property without compensation means they may as well remove the property clause in its entirety. So this is a complete what can I say? Abandonment of the post-apartheid property rights settlement.
So just before I move on, Martin, I'm interested in the legalities, because now since we have this current constitution, one would assume, and all the information is in the deeds office, is they know exactly who's supposed to have the property now. One would assume it would almost be like an automatic process. You just go to court, and then the order is passed, you get back your property. Why isn't that why isn't that happening?
So I'm not sure if it's all in the deeds office neatly stored. So I'm not sure what gets done to the paperwork after an expropriation. So it may be that there's quite a process to follow for these people to prove that this is in fact my property. But I'm 100% sure it's imminently provable. I think that information is somewhere. I mean, a fact that a lot of people do not understand is that the apartheid government did not think that what it was doing was wrong. So it did not shred all the paperwork. It did not burn the paperwork when it saw it was going to leave power. It thought that everything it did was justice. We, of course, know it wasn't. But the paperwork is there. It's somewhere. You can find it. So it seems like it's just a situation of political will that's required. I mean, most of these people are poor. They don't have the resources to go and track down this paperwork, to hire a conveyancer or a lawyer to help them with it. So this is something that you really do need government's help with. And I think those in Alex who do have the resources probably have already claimed their property back, and they live again with freehold tenure. But the vast majority, and they are represented by this organization, APOR, Alexandra Property Owners Association, they simply cannot afford to do this process on their own. They need government to buy into it, and that's not happening.
Well, it's just sad for me, because if AWC comes through, that's what's happened to Alex can happen in townships that have title now under the laws that were passed, especially Ultra. And for example, there are townships where people have properties, they have nice houses, as good as any suburb. It's just that the government services are not as provided as good as well as they could be. So if EWC comes through, it's not that it will be targeted, as we were said in the first part of the podcast when we were reference to Advocate Oppenheimer's talk, is that it won't just be white people affected by this. It will be everyone, especially in the townships. If government feels that in the township of, let's say, Sebokeng, they have a public interest, a right to build something, a school, a hospital, or whatever, they can just take your property without compensation. And so I think more people should be aware of that. But Chris, what do you think about this, the fact that the property rights were taken away from the people of Alexandra and the implications for today?
Oh, at the FMF, we highlight the impact of these apartheid era dinosaurs like SAA and Eskom on the people. and that these sort of legacies are still carried on through the new dispensation. But the whole, the expropriation of land without compensation of black people's land under apartheid is probably the premier example of the legacy of apartheid. The fact that the townships around South Africa, like Soweto, Alexandra, that they still grew despite what the government tried to do to them, is testament to the people there. And now under the new government, we think about the miracle of the new South Africa. Think about how much more of a miracle it could be if these people were securing their property rights. The fact that there's sort of the sword. Think of, you've been convicted of something, but there's the sword hanging over your head. That at some point you're gonna be thrown in jail, or you're gonna be executed. You can't live your life. You can't invest and build a business, and even make small improvements on your house. We've seen some of the impact of title deeds in Ngwati and Paris, how that can help people actually use the homes in which they live. But I don't know. I think it's a travesty of justice, if you want to put it that way, because it's their rightful property. And I just wish that, I guess with so many things, that politicians would just set aside these sort of petty differences and do they're supposed to be elected and do what's best for the people. That's sort of their mandate, apparently, but not that they ever live it out.
And it's not also just the restitution that still needs to happen is very important. It should continue, but there's also EWC that's going on as we speak, in terms of people who have who have land tenure in but not title to land in, they say, the rural areas, and the land is owned by these traditional tribal trusts. And so that's why it's almost like when it comes to EWC, we've been having it in South Africa. We are still having it, and we just don't want more of it. And so we should stop all the EWC that's happening now, restitute whoever needs to be restituted. And so that will require not just stopping what's happening now, but restoring people's property rights. And so do any of you want to add something to?
Well, just to make that point that you just made, these leasehold tenures, basically, if you can get expropriated, but it's not called expropriation. That's the problem, because under the current constitution, if you expropriate property, you need to pay compensation. But if you only lease, i.e. you're on someone else's property, and more often than not, that is the municipality's property, all the government needs to do is ask the municipality yes or no. Municipality says yes, it cancels your lease, and you're on the street, and there goes your property. And that's all the more dire for the people of Alexandra, because for the period that they still have lease and they are not being upgraded to ownership, that property can literally be taken and a school or something can be built there, and then the opportunity to get their property back is gone. So it's a matter of the greatest urgency that apartheid tenure be abolished in favor of full, unconditional, unrestricted, full ownership. I mean, we need to get there, and I mean, going down the route of expropriation without compensation as a constitutional amendment is the complete wrong direction.
Anyway, I think that's where we'll end it for today, and thank you for everyone who's listening. Thank you to Chris and Martin. Martin, could you please give us the social media?
Sure, yeah. So most importantly, please subscribe to the YouTube channel you are listening this podcast on. It's the big red subscribe button right under the video. Please like us on Facebook. It's Free Market Foundation South Africa, or just the URL is facebook.com/FMFSA. Then follow us on Twitter. It is @FMF South Africa, one word. And as always, visit our website at www.freemarketfoundation.com. Thanks. Cheers.